Hi, everyone. Welcome, friends of the planet. Today, I am so excited to be joined by Sean Casten, who is the Democratic representative for Illinois' 6th Congressional District. Hi, Representative Casten. How are you doing today?
Good. How are you doing?
I am great. I am so excited to talk with you about Hot FERC Summer. In your press release announcing Hot FERC Summer, you mentioned that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, is not often in the spotlight, but it is essential in the fight against the climate crisis. So could you take a minute just to break down what that is and how it helps fight against climate change?
Sure. First, I need to correct you. It's not FERC. It's the F to the E to the R to the C. If I did anything well in all of our celebration. So FERC is just this hugely important agency that gets too little attention, particularly when it comes to climate, because they're the only agency in our government that basically sets the rules under which electric markets operate, gas markets operate. Where do we permit our natural gas pipelines? How do we make sure that the costs created by one constituency are appropriately borne by another? And they've actually made huge changes, but they're this really sleepy agency that is frankly kind of nerdy. And, we wanted to try to draw some attention to it and get people to understand, particularly when there was an opening and a position that needed to be served, and put a little friendly pressure on the White House that let's get a real climate champion in that role. And so we started rapping on the House floor and things took off from there. And, if you can get Laura Ingraham on Fox News to talk about the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, I'll take that as a victory, even if it was a little embarrassing to get there.
I love it. I think it's a great way to, get people involved. So just to kind of get more into the weeds, in July, you introduced the Energy Price Act, which serves to ensure protection of the public interest when setting rates and to take into account how rates account for the cost of greenhouse gases. Could you talk a little bit more about this act and why it's important? Maybe break it down a little bit for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really starts from understanding that we've been talking about climate change the wrong way for 40 years. So much of the conversation has been around, on the one hand, we have people saying, I'm more moral than you. And on the other hand, we have people saying, I'm more fiscally responsible than you. And you have this fight between them. The reality is that every time we build a solar panel, a wind farm, a geothermal plant, put more efficiency in your home, get an electric car, you spend less for energy, right? Your costs go down because you don't have to pay for it. And that's a really good thing. It means it's a win-win, but it's actually creating a real problem across our whole nation's electric grids. Because if you have a grid full of generators that don't have any marginal cost to operate, the price of power falls so far that you don't have an incentive to build generators to keep the lights on. FERC hasn't really grappled yet with how are we going to deal with those markets, but you are seeing in places like Illinois, where I live, in places like Ohio, you've got these very cheap marginal plants, nuclear, who can't justify building the capital to do their refueling cycle. And so now we're having all these conversations saying, well, taxpayers need to bail out these assets because the market structures haven't given them an incentive to operate. And there's been a lot of scandals around that as well. But the whole purpose of this Energy Price Act is to get FERC to recognize that as we create this huge economic gain, let's make sure that a good chunk of that gain flows to energy consumers, but also some of that gain has to stay in the system to provide the incentive to build these things. Now, let me totally dumb that down. That means that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, in the name of reliability, could create a carbon price in our electric sector, right? Because if you're going to prioritize certain generation, what are you going to do? And that's really the idea behind it. What we say explicitly in the Energy Price Act is that they have an obligation to do that under existing laws. And because of some recent rulings that greenhouse gas emissions are a public health risk and that you have to take into account the equities, including between future generations, that's how they need to structure that. So we're trying to put some pressure on them to do what the Senate seems to be so incapable of doing, which is to actually prioritize the preservation of the planet.
Right, absolutely. And I think it's definitely a win-win to protect the planet and save taxpayers money, which is really
And
great.
lower your energy costs, right?
Exactly. So you also introduced the InterRegional Transmission Planning Improvement Act earlier this year, and this aims to seek energy solutions throughout many regions rather than individual states or locales. And obviously, this was a very hot topic when Texas weather shut down the electricity grids for miles. So how do you envision this rollout nationwide, and how do you think it would benefit communities and states as a whole?
I got to think of how to sort of explain this in a simple way. And by the way, Senator Heinrich has been leading this for a long time and really sharp person to follow on this. So our electric grid in the United States we talk about it as one grid, but it's actually this patchworks of different grids that work together and they have different rules in each section. The Texas example points this out. They had the same weather in El Paso they did in the rest of Texas. El Paso didn't go out because El Paso was not a part of the Texas grid, but they didn't have enough transmission lines connecting that part of the country that had excess power into the part where there was a shortfall. So more robust transmission is a good thing. We'll levelize costs. We'll make sure there's more reliability in the system. The challenge that we've always had with that is that the way in which each of those grid operators, so the PJM system, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, the NISO, New York area, the New England region, they all have their own set of entities and stakeholders. And if you are a participant in one of those markets, you kind of like it when the price of energy goes up because that's when you make most of your money. And so they actually have a strong disincentive within those systems to connect to another part of the grid, because when the system gets constrained is when they make a lot of money. So the idea of this interregional transmission planning is to have FERC take an executive oversight role there and say, we need to set up rules both to make sure that these lines get built to connect different regions, but then also to make sure that the costs of building those lines is appropriately borne. Because if I'm going to build a line from my generator to your house, who should pay for that, you or me? And how do we equitably allocate those costs?
Right.
And there's fair ways to do that, but you really need, you essentially need the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to be the parent overseeing some squabbles between the children on this one, if you will.
Right, absolutely. And I mean, climate disasters aren't getting any less disastrous. So whatever we can do to be proactive is going to benefit us in the long run, of course.
Yeah, it's also worth noting that, transitioning to a clean grid is the transition from a grid where we have right now, where we build generators where the demand for electricity is, to a grid where we're going to build generators where the resource is, where the hydro is, where the geothermal is, where the sun is, where the wind is. And that's really good. We won't emit CO2, but it also means we're going to have to build a lot more of these wires to get those resources up to where the load is. And so we're going to have to solve this issue.
So to pivot a little bit towards something a little bit more fun, we love the name Hot FERC Summer and your nod to Megan Thee Stallion. What made you choose this tagline and choose the Fergalicious Fergie as your sort of mascot?
To be honest, Hot FERC Summer was a little bit of a dare. I think it's important for anybody to know that if you watch the TV show Veep, it is a documentary. That the sort of tension in our jobs between the uptight, proper, never say a foul word person before the cameras, and then when we get in our office can relax a little bit and say atrocious things. And in our office, that involves a lot of hip hop references more often than not. I joked a while ago that I was a big fan of Cardi B's support for the Weatherization Assistance Program.
Yes.
That went over like a ton of bricks, but we workshopped it a little bit. And at some point, someone made a Hot FERC Summer joke, and it was a dare. We said, all right, I'll give a speech on the House floor, but only if you can work as many lyrics from that song into a speech that will not get me kicked off the House floor, which is hard to do in that song.
It was very impressive.
And a lot of props, the team saw that as a challenge, and, the spirit of Daniel Burnham and Chicago, make no small plans, and they delivered and kind of took off from there.
I love it. That is great. I love a good pun, especially in music. I'm going to throw one in of my own. So you coined the term Hot FERC Summer, but Joe Manchin wants you to wake him up when September ends. So to sort of shift gears, I would love to talk about CEPP and how Joe Manchin's skepticism over the program is keeping it from being passed. I would love to know, sort of in your own words, why passing the Clean Energy Protection Program is so important. And do you think there's a future for this program, or should we start looking towards alternative legislation that everyone can agree on, if that's even possible?
Well, I think this is one of these cases where it's always important the laws of the United States are negotiable, the laws of physics are not. And we got to start with a recognition we have already overshot the amount of carbon dioxide that our atmosphere can hold. If we get to zero by 2050, it's too late. If we get to zero by tomorrow, it's too late, right? We've already overshot. And so we have to get as far as we can, as quickly as we can, recognizing the equities and the challenges of that transition. What the SEP does is mandate that all load-serving entities, think of them roughly as electric utilities, have to get to 80% clean sources by 2030 and then all the way to zero by 2050. Puts them on a path to do that. We'll bring forward a ton of new construction, 7 million jobs, I think, is the forecast over the next 9 years, and lower the cost of energy. The total bill, the Build Back Better that we're working through, it will reduce U.S. CO2 emissions by about 45%, and more than half of that is in the SEP. 45% is a big number. It's not enough. And the biggest piece of that is the SEP. So if we take that out, we are essentially telling the world that when faced with hard challenges, we kick the can down the road because we are not capable of leadership. I don't
Mhm.
want to be that guy. But those are the stakes, right?
Right.
Because the West is not stopping burning. The hurricanes are not slowing down. As you said, these outages are getting more severe. So we've got to keep that in there. It's going to be hard for reasons that I'm both sympathetic to and frustrated by.
Mhm.
It's hard because building out clean energy will be the biggest wealth transfer from energy producers to energy consumers in the history of our species. And,
Absolutely.
and 100% of Americans are energy consumers. A very small minority of us are energy producers. West Virginia happens to have a lot of the latter. And so what do you do to look out for those people, those communities, those businesses? All of their wealth and all their skills and all they know how to do is tied in resource extraction. And the good news is within the Build Back Better, we've got some provisions to help out on that. But those folks are on the wrong end of a whole lot of economic trends because coal is dying in America, not because of leadership from the Senate. It's dying in America because it's not economic. The pain that is coming to Appalachia has already hit for the most part. And we need to make that transition much quicker and more humanely than we have before. I was chatting with somebody earlier today, in moments like this, you want a Martin Luther King figure who stands before the crowd and says, I've been to the mountaintop and I've seen what's on the other side, and I may not get there with you, but let me tell you what I saw.
Mhm.
And instead, we are cursed with leaders who say, that mountain looks too high. Let me sit down here and wallow in your pain.
Mhm.
Whatever that is, it ain't leadership, but it's what's pacing progress right now.
That is a very, very great metaphor. It's hard if you have a constituency who is so dependent on this finite resource. It's hard to tell somebody, hey, you're going to lose your job, but we'll get you a new one, because all they can hear is, oh, we're going to lose their job.
Historically, as a country, we've had lots of dramatic technological revolutions, right? The
Absolutely.
rise of the internet, automation of factories, mechanization of muscle power back in the industrial revolution. And in every one of those transitions, we've generally not treated very respectfully the people who were experts in the prior technology. Those folks are right to be skeptical, but change is going to come no matter what. I'm going to get on Sam Cooke at the end of this, but I know change going to come.
Yes, I love it. I love the musical references. It's so great. Well, thank you so much, Representative Caston, for joining me today, telling us all about hot FERC summer. I know I learned a lot about the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and I'm really excited for our readers to learn more as well.
Thank you so much.